It's another month, so let's look back at all the films and TV shows that I watched in the month of November. So the first film that I watched last month was The Apprentice. I'm not one to talk on American politics, so I'll just say that Donald Trump is a very interesting fellow, and this biopic shows his rise in the 80s, almost like a villain origin story, which I found to be really entertaining. You really get to see him being groomed into being someone that he wasn't in the first half, and then in the second half he does the same thing to other people, and that transition in his character is really well played out by Sebastian Stan. I never even knew Trump managed to reach the heights in popularity that he did in the 80s and 90s, and how he managed to abuse that power so much to get what he wanted. And I don't know how much of this film is real or is made up for the sake of a film, but it makes for a great film, so I give it an 8.5. And then I watched the original Gladiator. The second film came out last month, so I thought I'd give it a watch to prepare. I watched the director's cut, which is 15 minutes longer. I'm not gonna lie, I went in expecting not to enjoy this film because it gave me some Last Samurai vibes from bits and pieces that I've seen of it before, which is a film that I really didn't like much when I first saw it. And for the first act, my fears were kind of realised. I just found the battle scenes to go on for way too long, and I really didn't like Maximus as a character that much, but it grew on me so much as the film progressed. I actually ended up enjoying and really liking this film overall. It's just a really great Greek epic, and I just love the rivalry between Maximus and Commodus, and there's some really insane battles in this film in the Colosseum that I loved. The final scene in the film actually kind of got me emotional as well, which again I wasn't really expecting from this film, so I give it an 8. And then I watched Wolves. This film was just a large disappointment in my opinion. I just wanted it to have some life and something interesting to happen, but it just completely seems to be relying on the star power of Brad Pitt and George Clooney, which just didn't interest me that much. There was some really fun moments between the two leads, and there's some really well shot chase scenes, but I just didn't care that much for it. I give it a 6. And then I finished watching season 1 of Sherlock. This was another one of those massive shows like Game of Thrones that I just missed out on and I really wanted to get round to, and this is a really good first season. I think the feature length presentation of all the episodes really benefits the stories they want to tell in it, and Sherlock and Watson's chemistry is just so great. There might be some homosexual energy. I do think maybe there are some moments where I find it a bit hard to follow what's going on because there's a lot of blink and you miss it dialogue from Sherlock, and it did affect my experience with the last 2 episodes specifically, but overall it's a really solid first season. I give it an 8. And then watch Look Back. This is just an extremely beautiful film. It's not a proper feature-length film, it's under an hour, but it manages to go through and capture so many emotions in that runtime. As someone who loved to draw back in the day, it's pretty relatable with some of the frustration this main character has with her drawings and how it's pretty easy to give up when it comes to something like art. The animation really complements the story as well. It's just absolutely beautiful. It reminds me a lot of Studio Ghibli films with how fluid everyone moves. I do think it maybe gets a bit too manipulative with the score, especially during that third act. I just feel like it's way too overly determined to make the audience cry, and I felt like it should have just let the visuals and the voice acting carry a bit more rather than the score at some points. That is just kind of a nitpick. It's just an amazingly beautifully animated film, and it's really close to perfect in my opinion. I give it a 9.5. And then I rewatched Paddington. This is a film that I grew up watching. I remember watching it the first time in cinemas 10 years ago now, and I really loved it, and it's still great on rewatch. Paul King as a director just brings this great sense of charm and whimsy to everything that he does without making it seem cheesy or awkward, and this film just captures it so well. I really like the pacing of this film as well. It's just really well paced. Every story beat is just so memorable and fun to experience on rewatch. I don't really have much else to say. I give it a 9. And then I rewatched Paddington 2. I saw this one in cinemas as well, and I don't think I liked it initially as much as the first, but after watching it again, it's pretty much perfect. Again, Paul King's style feels even more elevated here, and he manages to make a street on London feel so familiar and welcoming. Paddington is just so insanely likeable in here as well. He was likeable in the last film, obviously, but in here it delves into his backstory and his love for Aunt Lucy, and at least this amazing ending, it had me a bit emotional with how it played out. Hugh Grant is just so good as the villain as well. Yeah, I give it a 10. And then I watched Paddington in Peru in cinemas with my brother. This one is a big step down in my opinion from the last 2. It's not horrible by any means. I think the Peru setting did take a while to get used to, but it ended up becoming a fun place for the Browns to explore as the film went on. You can really tell the change in director in this film as well, and it does kind of feel like this new director is was really trying to recapture that Paul King magic that made those two films so special, and it just doesn't reach those heights, unfortunately. I do really like Olivia Colman's character in here. I do think her villain reveal was so unbelievably obvious that I don't really mind spoiling it here. She has some really funny moments. On the other hand, I wasn't really the biggest fan of Antonio Banderas' character. He kind of feels like a bit of a rehash of Hugh Grant's character from the last film, but in Peru, where he's basically looking for these clues to find treasure. I did find a lot of things overall to be a bit of a rehash of the last two films, especially those final scenes in the movie, which did get me a little bit emotional, but it felt very familiar to the last film. So yeah, I give it a 7.5. And then watched A Different Man. There's another film with Sebastian Stan in it, and it's another great performance from him. A lot of people have compared this film to The Substance, with like the dual identity of things, and also little bits and pieces of body horror sprinkled throughout this film as well. But it also more deals with the mental side of things and how this main character takes on this completely different personality after taking part in this scientific operation. It's really sad yet morbidly satisfying watching this main character strive to get his old life back, even though he wanted the exact opposite when he had the condition. Adam Pearson's character really puts the nail in the coffin for this main character, and I love how you kind of see this like silent jealousy from him become like louder and louder to the point where he like basically goes insane. Yeah, it's a really fun time. I give it a 9. And then I watched Sing Sing. There's another A24 film that I really loved. Carmen Domingo puts in probably one of the best performances of the year in here, and I like how it's not just a character study on this character, but all of the characters in this prison who you really get to know throughout the runtime of this film, so that when something goes wrong, you like really feel for them. These characters are just so well written as well, and the prison setting kind of felt cozy, which I wasn't expecting from a prison. It kind of felt like a documentary at points with how good the acting is in here, and it makes sense because some of the actors in this film were actually portraying themselves. It just gives a whole sense of authenticity to everything, I guess. Yeah, I give it 9. And then I watched The Penguin. This show is just so unbelievably good. I've said this a lot for the last few films, but another amazing performance in here from Colin Farrell, who plays this irredeemable, evil character, but somehow manages to make him kind of likeable in his own twisted way. The writing in here is so good, and I just love the cat and mouse chase between these different gangs in Gotham, and it's so fun predicting who is ahead of who and who's going to come out on top in these situations. It's definitely my favourite show of the year from what I've seen. I give it a 9.5. And then I watched Megalopolis. This is actually the first Francis Ford Coppola film that I've seen, and it was a movie. There's just so many crazy performances in here that just absolutely baffled me, and there was multiple moments in this film that had literally my jaw on the ground from what I was witnessing. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of appreciate it, but it's also kind of mad. The story going on here kind of makes sense, but also kind of doesn't. The characters in here are kind of poorly written, but also kind of charming, especially Giancarlo Esposito's character. I also think the visuals look really great in some points, and then in other points look like something from an early 2000s music video. I've seen someone on Twitter edited clips from this film into the What I've Done music video from Linkin Park, and it fits in absolutely perfectly. I'm just so mixed on this film, but I can positively say that I was never bored, and there was always something going on. I give it a 6. And then I watched Saturday Night. There's a biopic on the behind the scenes of the first SNL episode, and I've never seen a whole episode of SNL before, but I had a really good time with this film. This film just doesn't stop from back to front, and it constantly has moving parts. It kind of reminds me of films like Uncut Gems, where the tension is constantly high and you really want this show to make it to air. There's so many great performances in here as well that embody the comedians that they're meant to be playing, especially Chevy Chase. Yeah, I was just invested the whole way through. I don't really have much else to say. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched My Old Ass. I think this is a solid coming of age film that really grew on me as the film went on. Aubrey Plaza puts in the best performance I've seen from her in a film, and I thought the concept of basically being able to break the concept of time with shrooms is kind of funny. I think some parts of the story are played out maybe a little bit too much, like the relationship between the main character and the character of Chad, and there are some odd character decisions that don't really make all that sense, like the main character's older self going on a retreat without even telling her younger self. But if you don't think about the film too much, then it's a fun time. I give it an 8. And then I watched Sherlock season 2. 2. This is a really good season that progressively got better in my opinion. I know people love the first episode, but although I found it to be like well written, everything going on was just so confusing and a little bit dragged out in my opinion. And then episode 2 was really fun. It kind of reminded me a bit of a filler David Tennant Doctor Who episode, which makes sense because they share the same writer with Stephen Moffat. Episode 3 is like actually perfect. I wasn't actually that interested in Moriarty at the beginning of the show, but his character grew so much for me in that episode, and that final actor was so unbelievably good and insane. Yeah, overall, I give it an 8.5 for the season as a whole. And then I watched Small 2. I was a bit hesitant with watching this film, as I don't do well with high jump scare films like these. I literally watched the first film basically behind a pillow, and I was screaming and making noise to basically water down the effect of the jump scares, but there were still some that still really got me. I do feel like these jump scares are like really earned though, and they don't feel like some of the films that I watched in October where the jump scares just kind of made me angry because of how cheap and desperate they seemed. These jump scares like really serve a purpose and are kind of thematic to the film, which I appreciate. Anyway, I like how it kind of continues the events of the first film in a really interesting way, and how the lore of this small demon is kind of expanded upon. Naomi Scott just puts in such a good performance as a superstar pop singer, and how she reacts to things, and just the writing of a character is just so great. I like how this film is just full of dread, and you're just desperate for a moment of relief from it all, and it never really comes. I just think it's a really good improvement on the last film, and I did really love the last film, but this one just really elevates the concept so well and ends on such an interesting note where I'd love to see a third film. I gave it an 8.5. And then I finished watching Sherlock season 3. This is probably my favourite season of the show. It goes in some really interesting directions, and it just really kept me on my toes the whole time. It continues the events of last season in such a great way with the first episode, and manages to keep up that quality throughout those 3 episodes. Yeah, I give it a 9. And then I watched Sherlock the Abominable Bride. I think this is a really fun one-off special that almost feels like a parody of itself in some instances, maybe because it's set in an alternate history where Sherlock existed in the 1800s, and it's really funny how all these characters speak a little different to how they do in present day. Like, they have more posher accents. I like how different every character is in here, especially Mycroft. I don't think the actual mystery going on in here is that interesting, and the way it tries to connect it to present day feels a little bit pointless, but I enjoyed it for the most part. I give it an 8. And then I watched We Live in Time. This is a really great romantic drama that really hangs on the 2 lead performances of Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield. I didn't expect this film to be as dark and as emotional as it was, and I think the non-chronological sequencing of the film makes for a constant rollercoaster of emotions. One scene you've got Andrew Garfield goofily running down the road in a dressing gown to get a chocolate orange, and then the next scene is someone dying from cancer. It kind of makes the film more visceral and kind of real in that sense. I've never actually seen Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield act with their normal accents before as well, but it's really refreshing to see. And again, they put in amazing performances in here. I do think maybe the non-chronological format makes some confusing moments where there's some things that were mentioned right at the start of the film but then don't come back around till like right at the end of the film, and I kind of forgot about them because of all this flashing back and forth. But I think it really worked for the most part. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched Sherlock season 4. This is definitely the weakest of the 4 seasons, and it has some really weird writing decisions, but I still really enjoyed a good amount of it. I thought the first episode was pretty good, even if John cheated on his wife, which feels a little bit out of character. And I did like the villain of the second episode, even though Sherlock was a drug addict in it. It's like every episode of this season always has bad that comes with the good. And that final episode, even though I did kind of enjoy it and did kind of remind me of a Saw film in some points, it didn't feel like a Sherlock episode, and it just didn't come to a fully satisfying conclusion in my opinion. It just felt like the writers had these big twists and turns they wanted to incorporate into the show, but they just didn't know how to write around them and make a proper story. I don't know, I give it a 7.5. And then I rewatched Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. The last time I watched this trilogy was I think over 5 years ago now, so I think it's worthy of a rewatch. I watched the extended edition of the film again, and I got reminded as soon as I click play on this film how good this film actually is. You just get sucked up into this world of Middle Earth and all these characters. The writing is just so good in here, and the CGI as well as the practical effects were so ahead of their time for 2001. It's a perfect first film in a trilogy. I give it a 10. And then I watched Conclave. This is a film that wasn't really my thing, but I really appreciate and understand why other people like it. There's some really great performances in here, especially from Ralph Fiennes, who has all this responsibility put upon him and is really struggling to take a side and root for someone. I like all the twists and turns in here as well, that in effect changed characters' views on other characters, and it's really well written in that sense. I just didn't personally find it to be as engaging as I wanted it to be. I give it 7.5. And then I watched Emilia Perez. Like Conclave, it's not really my thing. I've said this before in previous videos, but I'm not a big musical guy at all, and this was a lot of musical, which I feel like didn't have to be there at all. In a lot of the musical numbers as well, I could start to feel the pace, which I don't think is a great thing, and it's a shame because I do really like the story. I do think the final act of the film was very weird and ended an extremely unsatisfying way, which I think it was going for, but I didn't really like that at all. Overall, it's just a very mixed bag. I give it a 6. And then I watched the making of Do They Know It's Christmas. There's a BBC documentary with footage of the making of Do They Know It's Christmas. I really like the song. It's probably one of the best charity singles that has been released, and this behind the scenes footage is just really interesting. It reminded me a bit of the Greatest Night in Pop documentary that I watched earlier this year, but without the talking heads, which I do think makes for a few more boring moments, like filler moments where everyone's in like the control room and they're just waffling. But overall, it does really transport you back to that time in 1984. I give it an 8. And the final thing that I watched last month was Memoir of a Snail. This is now in my top 3 for the year. I love this film so much. First of all, I'm just a sucker for stop motion animation. I can't get enough of it, and the effort put into all the sets and characters into this film is just insane. The story is just so emotionally heavy and very depressing, but it manages to have this light at the end of the tunnel, which I thought made for a very interesting watch. It's also one of those films where it really sticks with you after you watch it as well, and that last scene of the film kind of got me teary-eyed. Yeah, I just love it. I give it 9.5. So those are all the films and TV shows that I watched in the month of November. I'm currently watching Dan Da Dan. This show is absolutely insane. I tried to explain it to my brother and he told me there's something wrong with me for watching this show. So the animation is amazing, first of all, and I do really like the story for the most part. The intro also goes extremely hard. I forgot to mention that I'm still watching the Graham Norton show as well. I said everything I really needed to say in last month's video, so check out that if you if you like this video, please leave a like. If you didn't leave a dislike, I give up. Bad company, get things together. Bad company, get things together. Bad company, get things together. Bad company, get things together.